dressed up in white. God's gonna
So we have a beautiful day today. I'd like to welcome everybody to the first annual Witness Stones installation ceremony. My name is Tom Bushnell. I'm an 8th grade social studies teacher here at Adams Middle School in Guilford. And it's my honor to play a role in today's proceedings. I'd like to welcome all the dignitaries who are with us on stage today, whom I will introduce to you shortly, as well as the students and faculty of Adams Middle School and the members of the Guilford community who have worked extremely hard in making the Witness Stones project come to fruition.
wait on me.
First, I would like to welcome First Selectman Joe Mazza, who will lead us in our pledge.
All rise, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Next, we will have Horace Little, Wendy Little, Christina Iglesias, and Stephanie Brown sing Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let us ride round till victory is won.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to welcome Reverend Ginger Brasher Cunningham, who will give an invocation.
We do lift our voices this day in remembrance of those who were enslaved here and who helped build our town. We lift our voices in sorrow as we seek forgiveness that people were enslaved in our town. We lift our voices knowing, as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We join with voices from Germany and South Africa and Montgomery, Alabama, to mark what has been so that it will stop and will not happen again. 2 years ago today, my family and I moved into this town, and it has been my privilege to work with this committee of people who are willing to risk making mistakes to help better our present and our future. Now, recognizing that we come from various faith perspectives or theological beliefs, I'm going to invite you to join me in either prayer, meditation, or silence as we mark this very special day. Let us be together. Spirit of grace, for those who are named and unnamed, those who lived through times that we cannot fully comprehend, we give thanks and we honor them. For the ways that the remnants of slavery has lingered through our culture, we pray for forgiveness. And on this day of remembrance, we yearn to know how to treat each other as equals and affirm that all are wonderfully and uniquely created and worthy to be loved. In gratitude for this community and the steps that we take this morning, we celebrate with joy. In peace we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Cunningham. Now please help me in welcoming the chair of the Witness Stones Project and our very own teacher at Adams Middle School, Mr. Dennis Colton.
Welcome everyone, and we're especially delighted
to have the people who weren't required to be here. We have felt many emotions associated with this project, from sadness to humility to exuberance, but the strongest emotion we feel today is inspiration. We are inspired by our students and teachers who have worked so hard over the past few weeks to discover the gems hidden in the probate and property records, emancipations, bills of sale, and other archival materials. They have polished and crafted these gems into vivid stories. We are also inspired by their parents who trust us with their children and support our public schools. We are inspired by our community leaders who care so much about our past, our present, and our future. Generosity and support from our friends at the Guilford Preservation Alliance, the Guilford Foundation, the Guilford Fund for Education, 66 High Street, and our membership have allowed us to dive in and really explore the work at hand. We are inspired by Gunter Deming and the Stoppelstein Project in Berlin. Above all, we are inspired by three people who are here today. We are here today to honor. Their stories are those of enslavement, but also of resilience, resistance, and agency. Moses, although enslaved, was a king and leader of his community. Candace, enslaved for years, was eventually freed and able to leave her estate to a great nephew and nieces. Phyllis and her husband Montrose, with their 6 sons and 2 daughters, filled our community from the village green to Nut Plains to East Guilford. These 3 people ran farms, spun wool, cared for children, baked cakes, rang church bells, cooked meals, tilled fields, harvested grain, and practiced many other occupations that helped build our community. With so little recompense and with such bleak futures, they chose to overcome their despair and live lives that showed hope, that exercised agency, and expressed their humanity. Today we get to hear their stories as spoken by our students. We are inspired.
Thank you, Mr. Colton. It is now my honor to introduce Paul Growald from the Stepping Stones Project. Mr. Growald.
So I was inspired to create what in other locations we're calling stopping stones, because my ancestors and my grandmother and her husband and my mother fled from Germany because they were at fear for their lives. And my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather and her daughter were killed by the Nazis, as well as other Jews and homosexuals and communists, people who were seen in Germany at that time as being different, of having different ideas, of having different skin color, of having different beliefs and feelings. And I was inspired when memorials were placed by the German artist Gunter Demnig, in front of the last known places where they lived, to bring this to my own country, where we have avoided and denied our own history of having enslaved people merely because of their skin color. So I ask you, everyone here, not just the young people, to think, when have I felt different because of something an appearance that I have, clothes that I wear, parents I had, where they came from? Where and when and why have I felt different? And the meaning of this that I see, of these witness stones, of these stopping stones, is to recognize that we should honor and remember and embrace our specialness, our difference, whatever those differences are, and whenever they show up in our lives. And these individuals whose names I'm stamping while I repeat their names, as I stamp letter by letter on these plaques, it's bringing that memory of them down to today and into my heart. And I encourage you, when you see these, to ask that question of yourself, because we all have the opportunity to honor differences and to recognize that our country, perhaps greatest among our qualities as a country, is that we accept in the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty and justice for all. And in our Constitution, we honor the diversity and the beauty of people's differences of all kinds. And so I want to thank Dennis Culleton, your teacher and friend, for his leadership, and the committee of people who's put this together. These are the first that are being installed here in Connecticut, which was a major center of the trade in enslaved people. And you should all be proud of what's been accomplished here in Guilford as the first in your state and one of the first in the country to embrace this history in this way and to honor the memory of these individuals. So I want to honor all of you and thank your town for all you've done and all you will do going forward. My final message to you is look for ways that you can personally make a difference, even in a small way going forward. Find something that touches you, that moves you, that bothers you or angers you, and figure out what can I do to help as an individual and particularly as this committee has done as a group going forward. So congratulations to all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gold. Please join me in welcoming now our Superintendent of Guilford Public Schools, Dr. Paul Freeman.
Good morning. As superintendent of schools, I have had countless opportunities to feel pride in this town and in our teaching staff in our schools, and most especially in our students. Countless times I have had the opportunity to step back and reflect and be impressed and simply feel pride in what we have accomplished. Today stands at the top of that list for two reasons. First, our students today are not simply students of history. They are historians. Our students didn't read a history. They didn't study a book. They engaged with real living history in their community. They went out and they wrestled with the history. They worked to understand that history, and they are taking actions based on that history as part of this larger community. Learning isn't about what happens solely in a classroom and in a book. Learning is about being that practitioner, and I'm enormously proud of our historians who are here today. More broadly than that, I'm proud of every member of this community, not just for reading our history, but for engaging and acknowledging our history. The fact that as a community today, we look at members of this community who were wronged, who were overlooked, who were ignored, and today we acknowledge and we own that, and we take action to try to better that. We take action to honor them, to recognize them, in fact, to celebrate the contributions that they have made to us, to our community. We're recognizing every member of this community in the actions that we take today. I am enormously proud of every one of you. I am enormously proud of the professionals who helped shape this opportunity, but I'm enormously proud of this community, of Guilford, for what we do here today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Please join me in welcoming now our first selectman here in the town of Guilford, Mr. Joe Mazza.
As I wind down my term, I was thinking of all the ceremonies where I had to speak. 350th anniversary, the groundbreaking of the new high school, which you'll be there pretty soon, and countless other ceremonies. But I'm glad that as I have a couple more weeks in office, yay, come on. That I'm able to speak at this ceremony, and I want to thank you for that. There are times in our history that make us uncomfortable and ashamed, but we must not erase them from our memory, no matter how hideous they are. To deny that they exist will not make them go away, but may cause them to reappear in a future society. One such incident occurred when the MS St. Louis, carrying 900 Jewish people, were attempting to escape Nazi Germany, but they were turned away by the United States because of immigration restrictions. Later, more than 250 of those passengers were killed during World War II in the Holocaust. The second atrocity in our history occurred in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, when the hostility towards the Japanese Americans culminated in the relocation and placement in the internment camps out west. This process stripped many Japanese Americans of their homes, properties, sometimes breaking up families, as the men were taken away as potential enemy aliens. If we do not expose these sins and atrocities, we face the consequences of repeating them. Therefore, we must continue to learn from our past so we can have a better future. This morning, we are here to acknowledge another painful time in our history through this Witness Stone project. We seek to restore the memory, honor, dignity, and the contribution of these individuals who helped build our community. I would like to congratulate you, the 8th grade students, who did the research, participate, as well as their teacher, Dennis Colton, who initiated such a meaningful project. Congratulations, students, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazza. Now please help me in welcoming Representative Sean Scanlon.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, along with my colleague, Representative Candace Freeman, to be a part of this really special occasion. And it's special for me specifically because I was once sitting where all of these students are sitting as a graduate of the middle school at Adams, and somebody who grew up in this town. And as Dr. Freeman and First Selectman Mazza had said, today takes a lot of courage in many ways for us as a community to publicly say that these 3 individuals were enslaved by our ancestors and our predecessors, and that they lived enslaved in a community that we today look upon as a place that probably wouldn't have happened if we weren't aware of these 3 individuals and others. And so today is a proud day for us to say that we are confident in ourselves as a people, that we can look in the past and see our wrongs and acknowledge them in the spirit of righting them today. And one of the things that I have been thinking about sitting here this whole time is that statue that sits right there. Because these stones and that statue, to me, represent our ability as Americans to right our wrongs. And I say that because etched into that granite right there are the names of men who died in the American Civil War, which all of us here know was based upon the fact that we believed that what was happening in another part of our country was wrong, and that the people who were being enslaved there should be free. And the men who are etched on that granite died and gave their lives for not just this town or this state, but for something way bigger than that, a cause of freedom, a cause of liberty, and a cause that we believed in since the founding of our country. And so, to me, when I now walk down here or tell people about this town, I am pretty proud of the fact that we can acknowledge the past in terms of slavery. We can acknowledge our capacity to right our wrongs in the American Civil War. And all of us today who are here talking about one wrong can try to find it in ourselves to right the wrongs that currently are in our society. Slavery, unfortunately, still exists in this world. It's an unfortunate thing, but it happens. But all of us have a capacity as citizens to recognize it, to combat it, and do it in the name of those who have previously been enslaved. And so today, it's my honor to be here. I echo the praise of Mr. Colton and all the students who made this possible. And I can just say I'm proud to be from Guilford. I hope all of you are too. And this is a wonderful day that I hope we all don't forget, because the cause endures, and it's incumbent upon all of us to keep making sure that it endures. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Now please join me in welcoming a representative from Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro's office, Samantha Palumbo.
I'm happy to be here on behalf of Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, who could not join you today because of her legislative schedule in Washington. Rosa asked me to provide some greetings on her behalf. I first want to acknowledge First Selectman Joe Mazza, as well as my colleagues who have joined me here today. I also want to take a moment to thank Dennis Colton for inviting me and recognizing the Adams Middle School students who participate in the Witness Stone project today. Give yourselves a round of applause. This is a significant day. It is important that we teach our children about the history and legacy of slavery. Each stone placed opens a window into one of the darker chapters in our nation's history. It captures the brutality and oppression of American slavery. Of the 500,000 Africans brought to these shores against their will, only a tiny handful managed to break free of bondage. The vast majority lived and died as slaves. And these stories remain relevant today. For the sad truth is, modern-day slavery still exists around the world. Even right here in America, there are still slaves. Most are women and children, and some are your own age. We must join together in doing everything in our power to confront this evil and end human bondage in all of its forms. So today, as you reflect on the life that each stone represents, we must also reflect on the contributions and achievements of the African Americans who fought and defeated slavery, settled the continent, birthed a republic, and forged a nation. But most importantly, pushed us to live our true ideals: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This project truly provides Guilford a great service by spreading a message of justice, tolerance, and equality. It inspires us to make America a stronger, fairer, and better nation for all. Again, I thank the children who wanted to be a part of this unique and special project and who wanted to make a difference right here in our own community. Please accept my best wishes on this wonderful occasion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have the 8th grade Adams Chorus, led by Miss Johnson, who will sing Yonder Come Day.
This is a spiritual from the Georgia Sea Islands, where there were very large plantations run by African American slaves, and where the population still lives, a lot of them, where they grew up. And it's a wonderful song. You'll hear some kind of Underground Railroad references in this song. And I hope you will enjoy also listening to our soloist, Geneva Eowyn O'Hara.
Yonder come day, Yonder come day, oh my soul. Yonder come day, day is a breaking, sun is a rising in my soul. Trees are green and the air is a breaking. Yonder come day, oh my soul. Yonder my friend, day is a breaking, sun is a rising in my soul. Yonder come day, sun is a rising. Yonder come day, is a breaking. The trees are green, sun is rising, very sunny. The trees are green, yes, sweet. Find the beach on freedom's ring. Sun is rising, very sunny. Young day is a breaking, young day on my soul. Young day is a breaking, sun is rising in my soul.
Thank you very much, 8th grade Adams Chorus. Great job. Next, I would like to introduce a keynote speaker for today's event, Christine Iglesias.
I am Christine Little Iglesias, and I'm very happy to be here today as a member of the Witness Stones Committee. Just for some background, my parents, Horace and Wanda Little, were born and raised in the South. My dad grew up on a farm in North Carolina, and my mom in the city of New Orleans. And they used to tell my sisters and me of the hardships of their youth, about growing up impoverished and segregated, along with some good stories too about family life and their traditions. Here's some good ones. I was born in New Haven in 1972, and we moved to Guilford in 1975. But I don't remember being aware of any difference about my family's color or race then. I honestly don't. I was 3 years old, and that wasn't something that came up during family discussions. My parents never put emphasis on the fact that our family was different in this town. They raised my sisters and me with open minds and open hearts in this town we call home. I admire my mom and dad for their courage in taking such a chance in a time that had to feel so uncertain for themselves and for their children's futures. But I'm glad my parents chose Guilford. And while I am not blind to the prejudices that still exist here, I am fiercely loyal to this town. I am. And proud of it too. I was raised by my wonderful parents, and I was also raised by this wonderful community. My perspective would change as I grew older. I remember becoming more aware that our family was one of very few black families in Guilford. I started realizing this around the time I entered the first grade at A.W. Cox Elementary School. I had learned to read and began to form my own thoughts about our family being among the first of any black families to live here. This wasn't something my parents told me. This was a conclusion I came to on my own as I noticed that my sister Wendy and I were 2 of only 4 black students at our school. I found it particularly fascinating that the principal at our school was a black man. His name was Robert Brasher. This was special for me because I was now aware of another person who looked like he could be my family, but was also the leader of our school. This was confusing too, because a lot of my classmates actually thought I was related to the man. I would do a lot of explaining about this over the years at Cox. There were kids who thought I couldn't get into trouble or be sent to the principal's office just because I was the same color as this man, but I got my chance to prove them wrong. Anyway, by the time I got to Adams, there were other students of color. And at Adams, slavery was something our classes read about in our textbooks and in novels. And they were the same stories we learned every year around the same season or month that would come to be known as Black History Month. Learning about Harriet Tubman or reading about Mark Twain's Big Jim raised general awareness about the concept of slavery, but it came across as slavery being a thing of the past for black people and a problem in the southern states of America. And when we studied slavery, it was presented as an open and closed kind of topic. It happened, it was deemed wrong, it doesn't happen anymore. And we'd move on to the next unit for that history class, like the Holocaust unit. During those years of learning, I wasn't making any connection between those slaves and my own ancestors. I didn't realize that I was missing the more human elements of those stories as we moved from unit to unit. They were just stories in my history texts about people I didn't know. And every month and every year when Black History Month came around again, I would learn about the same big names we had learned in years before. Same unit, same stories, open and closed. Today, my husband Ray and I have children attending the same Guilford schools as we did, and I've noticed that although the curriculum has evolved, the topic of slavery is addressed and taught with pretty much the same attitude, with maybe a little more politically correct awareness to flavor it. Only now the topic has been taught so much in the same way that to me it seems to fall flat. The subject of slavery is just an accepted part of a past that's over, but it's such a rich story, and it's far from over. I truly appreciate the struggles and sacrifices that my parents and my ancestors made in hopes that these changes would come. So that's why the student part of this project is so fascinating, because it's all about change happening now. And I'm eager to see how my own children will receive and approach this project and what changes it might bring about for them. The Witness Stones Project breathes fresh life into what has become a stale approach to the subject of slavery. This project is a way to honor and connect the identities and memories of those who didn't have the voices to speak of their own value or of their contributions to the town in which they also lived and worked. The programs you hold today show you the exciting work and thought the students have put into their essays. History seems much more alive and interesting now, doesn't it? During this ceremony, 3 of the enslaved in Guilford, Moses, Phyllis, and Candace, will receive recognition alongside those they helped in establishing this town. Enslaved people had important and meaningful roles in the lives of those who owned them, sure. But they also had their own lives, their own families, and their own stories too. As you will hear, these forgotten people were more than just names and dates recorded in our town's archives. These were the people who cooked, cleaned, farmed, and provided other valuable services for the founding fathers of this nation. The student essays beautifully restore life to these unrecognized people of our community, thus making Guilford's history more interesting and memorable, maybe even everlasting. It's so much easier to connect to people who had names and identities, and that connection is the whole beautiful point of the Witness Stones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Iglesias. It's now my honor to introduce you all to 3 of our students who will tell us the stories of Moses, Candace, and Phyllis. And up first from Team 8-2 is Dominic Daytech, who will share his biography of Moses. Dominic?
King Moses I. The text that follows is a story of Moses Montrose, a slave in the quaint town of Guilford, Connecticut, and how he came to be the king of Guilford. During the 1700s and 1800s, slavery was widespread in the U.S. Many of the slave masters were very harsh and gave their servants little to no rights. However, out of the ashes of racism and prejudice, there is evidence that there was always an exception to the rule. Moses showed his community that there is more to a person than his social status. Moses was born on April 30th, 1741. Due to the laws and traditions at the time, because Moses was the son of the slaves Montrose and Phyllis, he would also become a slave. In the last will and testament of David Naughty, Mr. Naughty states that he wants Montrose, Phyllis, and their child Pompey to be free, and that at the decease of my said wife Ruth shall be free and no longer servant or slaves, and also any child or children that may be hereafter be born of said Phyllis shall be free in like manner at the decease of my said wife, and that a house for them was to be built on nut plains with furniture, 1 cow, and 1 calf. This was written about 3 years before the birth of Moses, so technically he would be set free upon birth. However, Ruth Naughty wrote her will on December 14th, 1741, 30 years later, and instead stated that my will is that said Montrose and Phyllis be free, and no longer servant or slaves, and that my said husbands will be fully performed with respect to them. As to the said Pompey and the other children which have been born of said Phyllis since the date of my said husband's will, Moses, Aaron, and Candace, thinking it'd be much better for them to live in some good, regular, and religious families as servants than to enjoy freedom. What Mrs. Naughty is saying is that she thinks it would be better for the children of Montrose and Phyllis, Moses, Pompey, Aaron, and Candace, to remain as slaves upon her death against her husband's will, but for Montrose and Phyllis to be free upon her death. Sadly, according to the Bill of Burgess mortality at the time, Phyllis died before Ruth, so she never got to experience freedom. According to the document, Indenture of Moses a Slave, Moses was transferred from Ruth Naughty to Amos Fowler in the year 1762 at the price of £12 a year, showing us the economics of slavery at the time. This meant Moses was being paid for and rented as property, and according to the contract, would work for Amos for the rest of his life, thus proving Moses suffered from paternalism. According to Mr. Fowler's will, Moses is entitled to support outside his estate. Using this support, Moses can show us agency by sending his son Johnny off to college, as stated in Lyman Beecher's autobiography. According to this autobiography, Moses would manage farms and ring church bells, paid the bills, and sent a son of his owner at the time, Johnny Fowler, to college. Mr. Beecher also mentions that Moses lived a slave because he was a king. Black kings and governors were people that were highly respected by their community and acted as mediators between the black and white communities. They would also uphold law and, when necessary, meted out punishments. Moses was dehumanized every time his ownership changed hands, because each and every time his owner was changed, he wasn't referred to as a person, but as property. He was deprived of the basic human right of the pursuit of happiness. However, we know that Moses and his siblings sold Montrose's land for $26.67, thus showing another example of agency. Moses died on March 1st, 1812. What was left after his death wasn't much of monetary value, but it was the respect of both communities, black and white, that really show how respectable this man was. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Up next from Team 8-3, we have Hannah Grafe, who will talk to us about Phyllis.
Walking along the bustling Guilford Green, cilantros and the adorable village chocolatier to your left, grass and trees intermingled on the right, one would hardly believe that centuries ago this little town square was a stage for slavery. Many do not know. Stories of the enslaved people who lived in Guilford have been lost over the hundreds of years. During their routine walks around our little town, residents don't think about slavery, don't even let it cross their consumed minds, yet it was real. During the 18th and 19th centuries, slavery diminished the opportunities and happiness of enslaved people throughout Guilford. One such person was a woman named Phyllis. Phyllis, who lived from circa 1710 to 1772, was owned by David and Ruth Naughty of Guilford for approximately 44 years. Throughout her tragic life, she was dehumanized, mistreated, untrusted, and devalued by the economics of slavery. Yet she showed great agency, and although this agency didn't directly reward her, in the end it shaped the lives of those who lived later. Phyllis, who was born circa 1710 of African descent, was imported by ship on September 3, 1728. Before her arrival in Massachusetts, she was purchased from Providence, a Central American island. She was imported by Captain Peter King for David Naughty, a merchant of Guilford. There she was enslaved until her death in 1772. At the home of David Naughty and his wife Ruth, Phyllis worked as a spinner and a cook. It is likely that she had other jobs at the house, but the spinning wheels and cooking utensils left to her in Ruth Naughty's will confirm that these were her two main occupations. Along with Phyllis, David Naughty bought a male slave named Montrose. Montrose was imported on a different ship by Captain Waterhouse. Although the amount of money that Phyllis and Montrose were purchased for is unknown, an inventory of David Naughty lists the two as being worth £190. This was less than the cost of 675 gallons of rum and 36 gallons of molasses, which are worth £197. However, £190 was more than the vast majority of the item's economic values. Although there were exceptions, an enslaved person was one of the most valuable possessions that someone living in this time would own, not that the price assigned to them ever actually fit their worth as humans. These different prices show both the economic and dehumanization involved in slavery. Not only does this information reveal how much money an enslaved person was worth to slave owners, it also reveals how slave owners objectified the people that they owned. A price being assigned to a human, which meant to describe their value, dehumanized a life. The value of a person is based on so many aspects and certainly cannot be defined by an amount of money, if it can even be defined at all. In addition to being described by a number, Phyllis was also denied the right to a name and considered a possession. In many old documents, the way that the enslaved are listed easily portrays dehumanization. For example, in these documents, enslaved people are virtually never given last names, and often given no names at all. A name is a basic human right, something that any person can take pride in as their own. When a name is taken away, people lose their originality. As the also, the enslaved are listed with common objects that are, or should be, worth much less than a person. Some of these objects include fish from the Massachusetts Historical Society importation list, and yarn, molasses, saddles, and kettles from the inventory of David Noddy's estate. Being listed with these objects suggests that the lives of enslaved people were worth approximately the same amount or less than pots and pans to slave owners. In 1729, Phyllis and Montrose had their first child, a boy named Pompey. Over the next 22 years, Phyllis and Montrose had 8 children, half of whom died very young. Their second child, Caesar, was born in 1732 and lived only 3 days. 4 years later, Phyllis had a second Caesar who lived for 2 years. Flora, a daughter, was born in 1739. 2 years later, Moses was born to Phyllis, followed by Aaron. Phyllis's last son, Abel, lived for only 10 years. The final child of Phyllis was a daughter named Candace, born in 1751. In 1765, Phyllis and Montrose's first daughter, Flora, had a son named Caesar. This son was the only grandson of Phyllis. Eventually, Flora also died at the young age of 32. The high mortality rate of Phyllis's children indicates harsh treatment and poor living conditions. Although an average of more children died young at the time, the fact that so many could not survive must not have been a coincidence. It would seem accurate that, of all people, an enslaved child who was not treated equally to others their age would have the lowest chance of staying healthy. This could be due to malnourishment, lack of medicine, lack of money, or abuse. The treatment that Phyllis and other enslaved adults faced would have been similar, if not harsher, than a child faced. In 1738, 10 years after Phyllis was brought to Guilford, David Noddy wrote a will. His will instructed that at his wife's death, Phyllis, Montrose, and all of their children would be freed. He asked that, once they were freed, Phyllis, Montrose, and Pompey all be paid £10 per year throughout the rest of their lives. In addition, Noddy requested that 3 years after the family gained freedom, a house would be built for them, complete with furniture, utensils, and farm animals. David Noddy's requests for Phyllis and her family proved that great agency must have been shown. If Phyllis and Montrose hadn't been diligent and law-abiding slaves, it is unlikely that David Noddy would have bestowed upon them the estate that he did. Although we may think of agency as acts of rebellion that empower the oppressed, acts of respect can also empower. The respectful work ethic of Phyllis and Montrose gained them money, shelter, and other necessities. Using these gifts, they were able to better the lives of their children and generations to come, thus empowering their descendants. In 1772, about 33 years after she was promised her freedom, Phyllis passed away. The cause of her death is unknown, but its timing was a crucial part of her life story. After David Noddy's death, his wife Ruth decided not to fully execute his requests. In her will, written in 1771, she refused to free the 4 living children of Phyllis and instead loaned each of them to separate people for lifelong indentures. The only explanation that Ruth gave for her actions was that she thought it much better for them to live in some good and regular religious families as servants than to enjoy freedom. This is certainly not a satisfying explanation. It can be determined through the indenture of Moses to Reverend Amos Fowler that these 4 indentures had less of the qualities of apprenticeships and more of the harsh qualities of slavery. No money, knowledge, or license was gained through the work that Pompey, Moses, Aaron, and Candace did. Also, the time span of the indentures was limitless. Due to these 2 qualities that resemble slavery, we can assume that treatment in these indentures was similar to slavery as well. If Ruth had truly thought about what was better for the 4 enslaved people, she would have freed them. However, she may have been tempted by the money that she could produce through indentures. Each person who rented one of the 4 enslaved people had to pay Ruth for that person's work. We know that Reverend Amos Fowler had to pay Ruth £12 every year while he rented Moses. These indentures were a great economic benefit for Ruth because she made money with no output. She was not the one working, and because she had owned Phyllis when her children were born, she had never paid any money for Phyllis's children. Therefore, she was making money without ever giving anything for it. The money that she made off of slavery may have been very important to her income. In creating these 4 indentures, Ruth Noddy also showed paternalism. She made a major decision for Pompey, Moses, Aaron, and Candace, who were completely capable of making the decision for themselves. All 4 children had come to years of discretion at this time, and though Ruth claimed to have their consent, it seems extremely unlikely that 4 adults who truly comprehended the situation would have chosen a life of slavery over freedom. We can assume that Ruth took it upon herself to make this decision because she believed that she could determine the best solution more accurately than those whom it concerned. If Ruth had only decided to free these 4 enslaved people, all of their lives could have been drastically different. This kind of paternalism is something that Phyllis would have faced on a daily basis. As a slave, she would not have been trusted by those who thought that they were smarter than she. After her own death, the actions of Phyllis during her life prevailed. The agency that she showed through hard work for her owners gave her family an advantage that they would not otherwise have had. She overcame the harsh dehumanization, mistreatment, untrust, and devaluation of slavery because she knew that if she did, the lives of her children, grandchildren, and all who came after would be improved. Signs of Phyllis's agency are scattered throughout history. We see this agency in the sale of Montrose's property from his children and grandchildren to Abraham Everts. We see this agency in Candace's will, the will of a free woman who passes down her estate to the 3 children of her nephew. We see this agency in the life of Elamias Rogers, great-great-grandson of Phyllis, a minister whose goal was to establish a colony in Africa as a residence of African Americans. And we see this agency in Bertram Wadsworth Wilson, a descendant of Caesar Rogers, who fought for the American Air Force during the Korean, Vietnam, and Second World Wars. And lastly, we see this agency in ourselves, for without the actions of Phyllis and all those lives which her actions affected, we might not be here today.
Thank you, Hannah. And up next, we have from Team A1, Theo Freeman, who will tell us about the story of Candace. Theo?
Biography of Candace. Guilford, a small town on the Connecticut shoreline in New Haven County, founded in 1639, is known for many positive historical events that shape what it is today. However, there are also many negative events that lots of people aren't aware of. Slavery was one of these events. When you think of slavery, you don't typically think of Guilford, Connecticut, but there definitely was slavery in Guilford. In addition, most of the unfortunate slaves involved have been forgotten. Guilford wouldn't be the great town it is today without its history, so it's important that these slaves are remembered and recognized. One of these slaves was Candace Bow. Candace found a way to be her own person, even as a slave. She also wrote her own will, which most slaves didn't do. Some people may think this is impossible, but she did it. Candace was born on June 2nd, 1751, in Guilford. Her mother was a slave named Phyllis, and her father a slave named Montrose. They are both of African-American descent. Also, Candace was Christian. She had 4 siblings, Aaron, Pompey, Flora, and Moses. Her family was owned by David and Ruth Naughty. In their will, the Naughtys promised a house to be built for Montrose and his family on Nut Plains. David died in 1739, before Candace, Flora, and Aaron were born, and his will said that any other children born of Phyllis would be freed after Ruth dies. Ruth disagreed with this, thinking that the kids should be indentured instead, which is what she did. In her will, she sent Candace to live with Ebenezer Parmalee and his wife Anne at the Highland House. After they died, she willed they would be given to Hooker and Ruth Bartlett. Ruth sent Pompey to Ebenezer Dowd, Aaron to Levi Hubbard, and Moses to Amos Fowler, all Guilford citizens. This conveys paternalism because Ruth made the decisions of where the siblings will go, even though they're supposed to be free. She did allow Montrose and Phyllis to be free in addition. Ruth Naughty lived on the Green in downtown Guilford after David's death. After Ruth died in 1773, Candace moved to the Highland House when she was 22 years old. She lived there with the Parmalees. She did have goods that she brought with her when she moved, including bedding, pillows, sheets, iron pots, iron skillets, plates, and a spinning wheel, and more. From this, it can be inferred that Candace cooked. Also, another skill she probably had was making clothes, since she had a spinning wheel. When the Parmalees died, she was supposed to live with the Bartletts, but coincidentally, they had died too. Since there was no other place in Ruth's will stating where Candace should go, there was no other option. Candace was freed when she was 38 years old. After being freed, she washed things and made wedding cakes. This shows that she was more than just a slave in her life. She made choices of what she wanted to do and was capable of working on her own. She utilized her skills, cleaning and cooking, to succeed making wedding cakes and washing things. On September 30th, 1792, when she was 41, she married Tombo. He was the servant of Thomas Bray. They did not have any children. Meanwhile, on April 7th, 1802, Montrose sold his property for a total of $26.67. This doesn't seem like much now, but at the time it was a lot. Evidently, the value of money has changed from 1802 to now. The sale shows how much land there is and what the buyers get. After many years, on September 27, 1826, Candace passed away at 75 years old in Guilford. In her will, she gives her property to the 3 children of her nephew, Caesar Rogers, Abel, Flora, and Clarissa. The fact that she had a will shows that she is unique because most slaves didn't have wills. Candace is one of many forgotten people in Guilford's history that played a huge part in Guilford's history. She made her own choices based on her strengths, even though she was a slave. Guilford may seem like a boring town, but when you dive into its history, you'll find the exact opposite. It homes strong people like Candace, her siblings, and many other slaves who helped shape the town into its current self.
So once again, I'd just like to thank everybody who made this day possible. Certainly Mr. Colton and the entire Witness Stones committee. for all their hard work in the research and putting this whole program together. So let's give a round of applause, please, to the Witness Stones Committee. And thank you again to all the guest speakers who were able to join us here today. And most of all for me, as a teacher, I want to congratulate our students, the 8th grade students at Adams Middle School, who've worked very, very hard on this, put a lot of effort towards this day, and you should be very proud of yourselves, because I know that I am, and my fellow teachers are as well. So congratulations, the 8th grade students.
Okay. I'm going to say 4 sentences, not a long talk. Like Moses in the Bible, who led his people to the promised land, today Moses of Guilford leads his people out of obscurity. Instead of let my people go, we hear let my people speak. Remember us. Remember our history. Why should we? Why not let the past go? Rabbi Baal Shem Tov offers an answer. The secret of redemption, he said, lies in remembrance. All 3 of us.
Don't you know? No.